people tell me, well, I love my work, and so that means I'm not a workaholic. And I tell them, well, it's not an either or. I actually love my work too. I love being a professor. I love being an author. And I also struggle with workaholic tendencies at the same time.
Welcome to Ambition 2.0, the new podcast from Girlboss, where we explore what it really means to be ambitious in today's world. I'm your host, Amanda Goetz, two-time founder, CMO, mom of three, and I'm so excited about today's guest. I am joined by Professor of Industrial Organizational Psychology at the University of Georgia. She's the director of the Healthy Work Lab. She's the author of Never Not Working: Why the Always-On Culture is Bad for Business and How to Fix It. She's one of the leading researchers on workaholism and hustle culture, and her book is a wake-up call for anyone who feels like work has taken over their whole life. Dr. Malissa Clark, welcome to Ambition 2.0.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Thanks for coming all the way to rainy New York City today.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Some weather.
So I'm not going to lie. Reading your book, I was like, this is the book I wish I would have read heading into my 20s when I felt like I needed to hustle in order to kind of build that foundation of my career. So I want to start with just, you've studied workaholism for years. How do you define it, and how is it different than working hard?
Yeah. So I would say a lot of people think of workaholism as just the number of hours worked, but it's actually much more nuanced than that. And there's four key components. So there's the motivational drive. So we've all heard of intrinsic motivation, working because you love it, right?
Right.
So workaholism is a little bit different. It's working because you feel like you ought to be working. I think of it as like this inner pressure to work. I should be doing this. I should be working. Should be going all the time. I see it in your face right there. So that's the first part. The motivational is the push to work. And there's also the cognitive component. So you're thinking about work all the time. So even when you're not physically working, you're still working in your head. And with that push to work that you're feeling, you also feel negative emotions. And so that's the third dimension. So you're feeling anxious or unsettled or guilty if you're not working when it's the weekend or late at night. And the hours worked, that's the fourth piece of it. Yes, that's part of it, right? You're working all the time. You're taking work on vacation. You just can't seem to put it down. So it's pretty multidimensional. And, so I think a lot of times people just think, oh, it's the number of hours you work, but actually it's much more than that.
For people who are in their 20s and they're not like in management roles yet. So the should is maybe coming from above.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about, let's start with individuals first, but then I do want to talk about organizational, because I think there's changes that need to be made at the organizational level. But in your book, you talk about hidden costs of being always on. What's one myth about working hard that you wish we could debunk?
Well, I have a lot of myths that I wish we could debunk, but I think one of the ones that I hear all the time is people tell me, well, I love my work, and so that means I'm not a workaholic. And I tell them, well, it's not an either or. I actually love my work too. I love being a professor. I love being an author. And I also struggle with workaholic tendencies at the same time. So, the myth that if I love my work, then it's fine. I'm not going to experience the same negative outcomes. It's just not what the data shows in the research. And there's a lot of positive effects of loving your work, being engaged. It's awesome, right?
Yeah.
We all want to find a job where we love what we do.
Yeah.
Right. But if you also struggle from workaholic tendencies, the negative effects of workaholism, the impacts on your health and well-being and relationships, that outweighs the positive effects of being an engaged worker.
Right.
And you may not see it immediately,
Yeah.
but it catches up with you later on.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What are the earliest signs? Because I think many of us can tell a story, especially like when you love your job, you love your team.
Yeah.
You can see a path that you are on to keep going. And I know for me, like that, when I was a junior marketer, I'm like, I want to be a CMO.
Yeah.
And so I'm on this path. I want to get there. So what are the earlier signs that it's teetering on unhealthy? Like I'm trying to find that line of like, oh, you're working hard versus it's teetering on workaholism.
Right. No, I think that's really important to clarify, because I'm not against hard work.
Right.
I think
that's not what you're saying.
You have to work hard in order to achieve a lot of your goals in life, right? And so it's a continuum. It's not an either or, so it's easy to get to the point where you're working the long hours, you're putting in that time, and you don't notice that you've kind of let go some of your friendships and relationships. You're not taking as good of yourself, not taking time to exercise or just take a break from work to recover. And so I think some of the early signs are, do you find yourself forgetting to eat lunch, or are you staying up way too late consistently, right? Not just for a deadline, not just for a big project, because that happens, and that's
part of the
normal.
hard work, right?
Right, that's part of the hard work. But are you doing that consistently? Are you having a hard time falling asleep because you're thinking about work, or waking up in the middle of the night and you just can't get back to sleep until you get up and, send that email before you forget? Are you engaging in what I call working light behaviors? And so this is integrating work into things that don't feel like you're working, to almost like trick yourself into thinking, oh, I'm still relaxing and enjoying myself.
Wait, is that like the sending emails while you're binging TV?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I talk about it in the book because that is me.
Right.
I have a bad habit of pulling out my laptop and, doing these, meaningless tasks like, oh, I need to send these emails instead of just relaxing.
Right.
And so I call it working light because you kind of trick yourself into thinking, well, I am doing stuff that I enjoy. But the thing is, are you really ever detaching? Right.
Your brain is still
putting it down? Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's stick with the individual before we go to organizational. So if someone is doing this and they're watching this and they're like, oh shit, that's me. What is your advice to them? What would you tell them?
Yeah. So if you find yourself consistently doing those things, what I say, one thing is to schedule yourself into your to-do list. So I literally have to do this for myself sometimes. I put, a half-hour block in the middle of the day so that I eat my lunch, and I purposely don't do anything with my computer during that time. And also make sure you're engaging in, rest and recovery activities. And I talk about this a lot in the book because for me, I kept on beating myself up over the years because I wasn't really good at the typical rest and relaxation things like mindfulness or meditation. I'm trying to be better, but I'm still not that great at it. And I kept on thinking, what's wrong with me? But I think the way my brain is wired, I just like to be busy. I like to do stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And so
my coach calls it, I prefer active rest.
Yeah, no,
I'm an active rest kind of gal.
That's literally what the research talks about. There are ways you can rest in an active state. And so that's something that I think is easy to incorporate if you struggle with some of the other things like, the more passive, rest.
Right.
So see if you can start integrating some active recovery strategies. One that I love, because I tend to constantly drift back to work. My brain is just, hardwired like that, is to do something non-work related that requires a lot of focus. And so,
Legos, that's for me.
Legos, painting, color by number, learning an instrument, learning a new language, whatever your hobbies are, don't lose the hobbies. I think one thing that I appreciated is that I stuck with soccer for many years until I started getting injuries. But it lasted until my 30s. I played rec soccer.
Yeah.
And
rec leagues are great.
It's exercise, and there's a social component, which is great.
Yeah.
And it requires focus unless you want to get hit with the ball in the face, right? So all of those things, it helps you detach.
Yeah. And I think the thing that helped me is learning there are different kinds of rest that we need.
Yep.
There's physical rest, right? Like actually sleeping, but there's emotional rest. There's cognitive rest where I don't have to think about hard things. Yep. But there's also like sensory rest. I can get very overstimulated, especially when I'm in a big city and I'm running around. So sensorial rest, what does that look like? That's usually like me turning off lights and me like not having stimulation. So I think it's important that when we think about rest too, sometimes people are just like more sleep. Yeah. It's like, no, you're talking about detaching from work and figuring out what kind of rest you need.
Yeah.
Okay. Not every company allows for this. I know in my 20s, I had managers that would call every night just to kind of be like, here's what's on my head tonight. Like, here, let's talk about this. And I could never fully decompress because I kept my phone on the table waiting for them to text or call.
Right.
Obviously, that's a super unhealthy. I didn't have the tools to set the boundaries for myself, but I was also feeling like as a junior employee, it was so much easier to make those boundaries when I was at the top. So for many of the people who are still earlier in their career, let's first start with what are the biggest mistakes leaders make that unintentionally fuel workaholism in their team. So what are leaders, if somebody's a leader listening, what is something that they may be doing unintentionally to instill that kind of culture?
Well, I honestly think sometimes these impromptu texts or Slack messages, they don't even really realize that they might be reinforcing this always on kind of connection with their team. Yeah. Sometimes they intentionally do. You get those leaders, I think maybe it's one that you were just describing, that this is how they run their team and this is the way that they think, it needs to be done. And those are really difficult to convince them otherwise. But sometimes unintentionally, they might just be sending an idea that they have before it escapes their mind, but not realizing that it's midnight and you had your phone on and now you've woken up.
You are.
Right. And
thinking
so
about work.
That's something that can be pretty benign in their mind, but actually can over time can really, reinforce just always wanting to be there to not miss anything.
Right.
So I'm really big on schedule sending, not just emails, but, now you can do that with a lot of these messaging apps as well. And so that's an easy fix, that if the team leader is on board with making some changes and really enforcing some boundaries, I think that's a really simple fix that can go a long way. Another thing they might unintentionally do is, even if they, want the team to have good work-family balance.
Right. They say that.
They do. And, those boundaries are established. But what happens is the culture is set by the worst behavior that's tolerated. So
hold on, let's say that again. The culture is set by the worst behavior that is tolerated.
Yeah. So the first person to break that boundary and send that text on the weekend or late at night, if the leader doesn't correct them, in a gentle way, like, hey, remember we're going to be offline unless it's urgent.
Right.
if they don't correct that, then that just starts that cycle all over again.
What advice do you have for someone who they want to go to their boss? And I can share, for me, luckily we worked in a culture that used start, stop, continue already in one-on-ones. So if you've never heard of start, stop, continue, it's this framework that you can use for one-on-ones it allows for feedback to be given in a very non-emotional, non-triggering way. It's not waiting till like a performance review, right, to give feedback. And it goes both ways. The manager and then the person being managed can go both. And so what do I need you to start, stop, continue? What do you need me to start, stop, continue? And I remember that boss, she didn't even know that it was affecting me so greatly. And so in a start, stop, continue, I was just like, I need you to start doing X, Y, da, 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 da. Then stop. I said, is there any way you can stop doing the late night calling?
Yeah.
Send me an email and I will see it when I can have some autonomy and control over when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, I had little kids at the time too. And I was like, I can't be fully present with my kids or my partner at that time because my brain is half on that. And luckily she received it well.
Which is great.
Yeah. Is there any other advice you have for someone who might be listening being like, how can I communicate to my boss, my leader, that this always on culture is slowly like hurting me?
I wish every boss was as receptive as yours. I think that's the best situation when you have someone that you can be honest with them and they will listen. And so is your question for if they are not?
Well, just in general, do you have any other vehicles or ways to say it to them? Like, I think it's helpful to maybe put things into a perspective for the leader where they understand how bad this actually is for the organization. Because like, are there any stats that someone can take away or just things to know? I'm sure every leader knows, okay, when employees burn out, they're not great employees. So how could an employee say that? Like, if you're burning me out, I'm not going to be able to produce as high.
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky. This is just off the cuff. Maybe something like, I want to do this when I'm at, 100%. Can I tackle this in the morning or something like that?
I love that.
And then maybe hopefully later when it's not in the moment, you can have those conversations that you were talking about with setting more boundaries. Gosh, I just wish everyone was so open to receiving feedback. One other thing I just thought of too, a leader might unintentionally be modeling those behaviors. So again, it's not what they say, it's what they do.
Yeah.
And so are they at the last one in the office? Are they the ones sending the emails all hours of the night? Or are they the ones when they go on vacation, they're actually disconnecting for a few days? And so what kind of things are you role modeling as a leader? That goes a long way too.
100%. I think it's so important. So how can ambitious people like ourselves who maybe pride themselves on productivity, reframe success so it's not tied to hours worked or input? And I want to throw in, I've seen this. I mean, I'm divorced, so I heard this phrase said to me about, working long hours and always being on the phone. This phrase that I'm doing it for the family or I'm doing it for you. How, do you have a response to some of the lies that we might be telling ourselves about our workaholism, that we're doing it for other people, we're setting ourselves up for success in the long run? Like, what other things what other maybe stories do we tell ourselves about our productivity?
Yeah. Oh, that's so great that you mentioned that, because I think we tell ourselves that a lot, thinking of, well, I'm just going to put in those hours now for some future success. And while that's, partially true, of course, we have to work our way up into these positions. You can't sacrifice your immediate needs for long-term goals all the time because it's not sustainable. So maybe talking about like, is this a sustainable level of productivity, instead of just go, 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 and then you're going to hit a wall at some point one day, and then whether you like it or not, you're going to have to stop. When I interviewed people for the book, I talked to a lot of different people who struggle with workaholism, and there were several that they got hit with some sort of debilitating illness, that they weren't allowed, or they weren't able to work at all. And they had to face this question of, now what do I do? Because my whole life was my work. And, they were telling themselves this whole time, I have to do X, Y, Z to meet these goals. But they had forgotten that they're actually living in the moment right then. And, it was really kind of an existential crisis for a lot of people. What is life about? It got really deep in some of these interviews. And so, I think and I think COVID put it in perspective for a lot of people. And really, life is short. And what is the purpose of all of this if we're not going to enjoy the success and have a fulfilling life outside of work too? Because
I love how you said, like, you can't let your current self deprive, like, or you can't let your future self deprive your current self. You're kind of trading your current life for some potential future life that it is not guaranteed.
There's a term for that. It's called time discounting. We do tend to think, oh, we're going to have so much more time in the future. Like you said, it's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed. I know people that wait until their retirement to travel the world. Or to take those big vacations, and then they get sick. And they can't travel, they can't fly, and then that's their life. So and
they're waiting to do all of those things. I'm going to work until I retire, and then I'm going to do all those things. Why? Do those things now, and work hard at the same time. But I see it over and over.
It's so sad. And I think I'm really hopeful that I think a lot of people in their 20s are seeing this faster than I think maybe I did or we did.
I definitely see it. My students are saying that in the classes.
They're like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not signing up for this, like, wait until I retire, because
I see their parents and their grandparents,
But many of them will still go into an organization that is expecting them to give their life to. So, okay, if you could wave a magic wand and redesign how companies approached performance and culture, what would be different?
I wish that we could praise working smarter and not longer. Just because someone spent 36 hours on a project doesn't mean that it's the best quality. Sometimes we do our best work. I know I do my best work in the morning when I have my cup of coffee and I'm fresh. And if I were to work for 12 hours straight, I would be brain dead. My brain would be mush. So why can't we reward, working smarter, like 2-3 hour, very focused state, right?
Parkinson's law.
Yeah. I mean, it.
I say, like, my focus 2 hours is someone else's 12 hours. Facts. Like, if I'm focused and I'm putting all of my cognitive resources on one thing, you don't need to pay me. But I think the concept of billable hours, as you were talking, I was like really thinking about the different things that have been injected into work culture. Billable hours.
That's so detrimental, right?
We're literally, who builds the most hours this, and they're praised for it.
Yes, exactly. And some fields, that's just how it works. And that's really hard to get out of. But you said wave a magic wand. So this isn't perfect.
Exactly. Perfect scenario.
Also,
anything else that you would wave your magic wand and change?
I would love it if we had the 4-day work week.
Do you think it's going to ever happen in America? Like, what are you?
No, I don't. I think that there are some companies that are doing a great job,
Yeah.
but, in terms of widespread adoption, we just have so far to go
Yeah.
as a society. But the data is so compelling. Not only is it good for people's well-being, but it actually is good for the bottom line. They're showing increased revenue, decreased, health claims, and worker well-being is so much better. And like you said, do we really need to be working all these hours to be actually really productive?
Mm-hmm.
No. We're set on this 40-hour work week that was back from Henry Ford.
Right.
And we have all this technology now, and AI is making things even more efficient. But we're still, we have to a 40-hour work week. That's full time minimum. It really doesn't make any sense when you think about it.
It doesn't. And so for someone listening and they're working in a culture that, signed up for the 40-hour work week and they're set in it, are there some tips and tricks for how to carve out or build this kind of rhythm to their life where I know for me, when I started to get into like the middle of my career, like early 30s, I really pushed for no meeting Monday. Like, let me start my week and like get my shit together and done so that I can start into Tuesday. And if I get sucked into meetings for the rest of the week, okay. But like anything else that comes to mind for you that you think really is beneficial to somebody that they could try to advocate for that is still like, okay, I see your 40-hour bullshit work week, but like what's something they can kind of push for?
How devious do you want to be?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's get devious.
Well, so there's some interesting research showing that actually companies sometimes can't tell the difference in whether you're working 60 hours or you're actually working 40 and you say you're working 60. And I'm not saying people should be deceiving their companies,
right.
But why do we keep on bragging about all this extra time we're working?
Well, I think I was just going to say I think a lot of bosses think that there will be more output.
Yes. They absolutely do.
I've had somebody say to me in my career, I would try to leave at 5 on the dot, like every day. I was very religious about that. I was like, I have a workout I'm going to, I got a dinner to go to. Like I always had something that I was like, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
But I remember at my performance review, you're hitting all of your goals, you're hitting everything, but just think how much more you would be able to do if you stayed a little longer. So I think that there's this notion of more is more.
Hone in on.
Right.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get devious.
Yeah. Let's get devious. Well, I mean, the research shows that oftentimes companies can't tell the difference. And so I think this goes back to working smarter. Could you just, if you have to leave for a workout or you're, we have a younger audience, so you don't really have kids yet maybe, but say you have something personal that you want to do a yoga class, whatever, in the middle of the day, just say you have an appointment and then leave for your appointment or meeting, right?
No one needs to know what the appointment is.
No one needs to know. And the reason I'm suggesting perhaps doing some of this is because what we do see in the research is people do get penalized for advocating for work-life balance in these 24/7 always-on companies. And so it's like, how do you thrive in this environment and still have balance? Sometimes I think maybe just being purposefully vague is not going to do things like with your boss putting these things on their radar, like, well, you would be much more productive if you didn't leave at 5. Well, they know that because you were vocal about leaving at 5, which I would say as a leader, that is what you should be doing, modeling that behavior.
Right.
But as someone trying to survive in this type of cutthroat environment, I mean, I think sometimes you have to be a little selfish, and that is, important
it's so important. Yeah. Like literally this whole, there's like dedicated sections of this book talking about what happens when you don't.
Right.
When you let go of the that time for yourself, right? It doesn't end in a good place for you, and it won't end in a good place for the company.
Yeah. And I just hate that people would have to even pretend, for the company culture. I hate that. I hate that I'm even like recommending that, but that's kind of where we are in some of these industries.
It is. And look, the job market it can be really tough sometimes.
Yeah.
And so the great advice would be like, quit that job. It's toxic.
Right.
But that's not
course.
realistic. Like, I know I wouldn't have been able to do that in some of my positions. And so I think it's really important to start to take back being a little selfish with your time and communicating some boundaries. And I personally like respect, now that I'm a leader, I respect when somebody is like, hey, you have given me 10 things that are all priorities. I would be moving each of them forward 10% this month.
Yep.
I'd like to move 2 of them forward 50%. Which 2 are the most? And when someone says that to me, I'm like,
yeah,
they're thinking about the business. They're thinking about their time effectively.
They're working smarter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I respect that too. And I wish that more people would have that approach, but it could be scary. You seem like the type of leader, though, that people would be okay with saying that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's also been like, when being a single mom with 3 kids, like I had to create that boundary for myself, because my kids were going to bed at like 6:30 when they were little. And I'm like, I'm leaving at 4:30 every day.
Yeah.
And for me, when you're the leader, I communicate it. Like,
yes,
I'm leaving at 4:30 to go be with my kids. I will be back online at 7. If anyone needed something from me, send it to me. If it's urgent, I'll review it then. Because for me, it was about the communication of, yes, I'm leaving early. I'll be back on to check to make sure there were no emergencies. And because I think it's in the absence of information, people make up their own information. And so if you're leaving at 5 every day, then people are going to start saying like, oh, they're not dedicated. They don't care about this job. When in fact, you might be needing to get home to take care of a sick family member or whatever.
Right.
People will just want to make up their own story. And for me, it was always about telling my own story. Like, I'm going to be in control of this narrative. I loved that job, and I was going to go home and put my kids to bed.
Yeah. I did something very similar. I loved doing the pickups from school.
Yeah.
And of course, that's at an inopportune time
ever.
Right.
Yeah.
So every day between 3 and 4, everyone that I worked with knew, well, don't schedule meetings with me between 3 and 4 because I'm doing the car rider loop. And that was important time that now that my kids both are driving and one's in college now, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm also really glad that I communicated as a leader, this is really important to me. I'm prioritizing family. I also, would come back online later to, make up for some of that lost time. But I mean, I think just communicating, we have other really important parts of us. And, I think it's good to role model that.
It is. It's so good. And so I think great takeaways here are, it's okay to be selfish. And in fact, it's really important. Maybe using start, stop, continue to communicate to your boss if you have that relationship with them. Working hard is not workaholism. And I love that you laid out the different dimensions of what it is. Is there anything else you would want to leave the Girl Boss audience with today about the always on culture that they may find themselves in?
Yeah, I mean, it can be so tough. And putting myself in your shoes, I remember just that pressure and feeling like this is the only way that it can be. And how the heck is this going to, how am I going to be able to sustain this my whole career? I do think, just keeping in mind, don't lose yourself in your pursuit of your career. It's it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself too, you know. Um, just remember to keep your hobbies, keep your family and friends, you know, keep those relationships because you know, companies, they're not your family. They might say you're like family, you're like family. They're not your family. And you have to make sure to keep yourself and not lose yourself in that.
Yeah.
And you can still love your work, like I said. But if you find that your work is kind of becoming your everything, then, you know, just remember there's more to life than just work. And, you know, we both love our jobs, but there's just so much more that, you know, makes life great.
And so if for anyone listening who's ready to kind of start setting some better boundaries tomorrow, what is one practical tool that they can shift, like bring into their life and start trying immediately?
Well, we've talked about a couple that I think are easy to implement, right? So look at your to-do list, and I know I like to have the check boxes and check that off, but make sure you put yourself in there. Schedule yourself in your to-do list.
Love.
Make sure to integrate some sort of rest and recovery activity at least every week, if not every day. Or most days. And remember, it doesn't have to be just passive things, which if that's your jam, then great, right? But if it's not, what are some more active things that you can do that will allow you to disconnect from work? Because that psychological detachment is very, very important too. And so I would say those two things are pretty easy to implement immediately.
Yeah.
And then for me as a leader, schedule sending my emails. That's a big one. For my staff, my students, I really am very adamant about schedule sending. So
I think
it's good to get in that habit.
I love that you said like a great leader stops that behavior. Because I think sometimes when you're junior, you think you're going to get extra brownie points by showing that you're sending the email at midnight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to stop that quickly as a leader and say, this is not what we do.
That's not going to impress me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love. Okay, let's do a quick rapid fire.
Okay.
First time you realized you might be overworking?
Well, when I was a kid, doing every single club and sport in high school.
Yeah. Okay. Email subject line that will likely make your stress spike immediately.
Urgent.
Yeah. Just anything
urgent.
What's more toxic, a Monday morning meeting or a Sunday email?
Oh, Sunday email. Yeah, hands down.
Is there a Zoom fatigue cure that actually works?
Well, actually, one of my colleagues said shutting the camera off can prevent Zoom fatigue.
Okay.
Yeah, but less Zoom meetings, more in-person stuff would be good.
I know. Hot take, is Slack more helpful or hurtful? From a doctor.
Hurtful.
Okay. You heard it here.
Yeah.
It's not helping everyone.
No.
What's more dangerous, not taking PTO or working on PTO?
Oh, I love this one. Oh, it's hard to choose. Working on PTO. I don't know. They're both bad.
They both.
Yeah.
You shouldn't do either.
Yeah.
Take your PTO and don't work on.
Well,
your
if you never take your PTO, that's a big problem. So maybe I'll switch to that actually.
Yeah. Last question. What's your go-to transition to get out of work mode?
So on my drive home, I listen to a non-work related podcast and just like, again, get my brain off work. And that commute is actually my transition period.
And if you don't have a commute, because I don't have a commute anymore, I take a bath. I call it the commute bath.
I love that.
And I take a bath. Yeah, I take a commute bath every day, and it allows me to get back into mom mode and partner mode.
I'm gonna have to start doing a commute
bath.
bath.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening. Where can people find you and find more of your work?
You can check out my website, melissaclark.com, spelled with an A, so very unusual.
Yes. And then check out her book.
Yeah,
Never Not
check out my
Working.
book anywhere where books are sold, and look me up at University of Georgia. Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. All right, so don't forget to rate this episode and leave a comment at Girlboss, at the Amanda Goetz, and tell us what other topics you'd like to see on Ambition 2.0. We're so excited to keep redefining what it means to be ambitious without burning out. So thank you so much for joining. We will see you next week.